Welcome to our Teaching for Success Inclusive Series podcast. Today, our guest speaker is Candice Comeau. She is a special education expert. She is also a wife, a mother, a new grandmother, and she will be here answering some questions which will help us learn more about inclusivity in our schools, especially in Uganda. Welcome, Candice.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So our first question for you is, in a system stretched for resources in many countries in education, what are the most important, effective, low-cost strategies that you can recommend for teachers to support learners with different abilities?
Well, I think that is a problem in many places where there's not a lot of resources. But I think if we bring it right back to the basics, and that is building relationships with students and with their families and learning about them. So once you learn about the child and learn about their interests, you can start to use those interests, to help engage them in activities and also to help with some of those more challenging behaviors. So I know at our school, we explicitly find out what the kids are interested in, and then we use that when we are trying maybe sometimes to change a behavior. So we often will refer to a first then choice that we give them. First they have to complete something, then they have the opportunity to do the preferred activity, which could be something that we found out is something that interests them. So that is something that doesn't cost money. We don't have to go out and buy things for that. That's just getting to know the student. I would also say that, tapping into the family's information so that they can say what works at home as well. And then we're using that as well. When we do that, we see a decrease in behavior and an increase in engagement. So it doesn't require anything financial, and it helps to build that strong relationship with the child.
Okay, so what can you give us like a specific example of, say there's a child who is autistic, and what kind of interests would you use, like strategies would we use based on their interests? Can you give us an example?
Yeah, so we have students sometimes who they might be highly motivated because they like sounds. They like music, or they like to have activities that are like cause and effect. They touch something and they hear a sound. So we might have on a child's schedule that they first have to complete an academic task, and then after that, they get to play with a little music box or maybe a little shaker that's a bit of a rattle. And we find that when we say first complete the task, and then we have a visual representation, just a picture, or sometimes the actual toy or tool that they're going to get, when that is accessible to them, they're more motivated to finish the first thing. We also notice that sometimes when children have been escalated and their behavior is a bit challenging, we can redirect them by telling them or showing them, okay, first we need you to take a break, calm down, and then you can get whatever the activity is. It could be some bubbles that they're playing with. It could be a coloring activity that will help them to calm down so that they can then go on to the next activity. So those are not things that cost any money, but it's just about learning about the child, because one child might say that they really enjoy playing basketball, but that doesn't mean all of the children will. So we have to learn about the child and what their interests are.
So how can you learn about a child? Say a child is nonverbal, they can't speak, so how would I figure out their interests?
I would say that you're really observing the child. You're watching them in their environment. You're looking to see what it is that they'll go to and what they will play with. So if there's, a child who goes into a room and you have multiple activities, but you're noticing they continue to go to play with some Play-Doh, or they continue to go to where the coloring is, then without them even having to tell you, you can see what they're interested in. And we'll see that with other students who they want to run. And our initial reaction might be that, they're being a little bit naughty and they're just running. But it may be that that's a student that needs extra, movement breaks. So when we see that, we can implement that into their day. And again, those are things that don't cost any money. We can give them a break throughout the day where they're going and they're having a little bit of extra movement.
And I also have a lot of parents saying, I know my child best. I know my child better than you. So even using a parent as a resource to find out what interests a child has, whatever they like doing at home, could be a strategy that you could use.
For sure.
Oh, thank you for that. So how would you, next question, how would you help shift the mindset of staff, like teachers and students, from seeing inclusion as like a charity project? We feel sorry for the kids, so let's just put them in regular class, to understanding that it's their right and it's something that would benefit everyone, not just themselves as a child who might have some kind of disability being in a mainstream class, but how would it benefit all the other students?
I think that, when we are teaching, we typically are teaching the maths and language and science, but there is another part to teaching that we sometimes miss, and that is the empathy and the care and the compassion. And I think that when we are including all students, we learn a little bit more about each other. We start to see what each child brings, and that everybody has value. Every person on the planet has something that they bring. And sometimes the rest of the class and teachers and other students will have to learn to be a little bit more patient. But that is good for the child with special needs, and it is good for everybody else. You have to be patient if you go to the store and you line up. You can't just go to the front of the line. So in every aspect of our lives, we have to learn to be, patient. We have to learn to care for others, and school is the perfect setting to start that. So I think that once, a school starts to see the benefits all around, then they start to recognize this is good for everybody. And I think that's where the shift has to be, is that, they're recognizing that, like you said, they're not doing it just because of that student. They're doing it because, school is a small setting that kind of replicates what the world is. You're not going to go out into the world and find everything, runs perfectly. So this is where you start to learn how to navigate relationships that are a little bit different, how to work with people who learn a little bit differently, and how to find value in everything.
Yeah, and how to work with people as well who are different from us.
Yeah.
And also to help children to be accustomed to other children behaving differently, looking differently, so that maybe when they're outside of school, they're not making fun of them, they're not laughing at them.
Yes.
And as you said, you're right, teaches children to be very compassionate.
Yes.
And I remember in one of my son's schools, for elementary school, they had a class with students who, many of them were in wheelchairs, but at break time or recess time, they would get kids from the mainstream to take them outside, push them on the wheelchairs, and they really loved that and built a relationship with them, which is what we want to do. We don't want there to be that stigma because someone has a disability, especially if it's physical.
Yeah, and I think it builds up the other students as well. I mean, we see it in our own school, where, the older students are highly motivated to come and help with the younger students, because not only is it good for the younger student, but it has an intrinsic value for the older student. They feel good about themselves doing it. And they feel they start to show that they care about that child by asking if the child is not there the next day, or wanting to be part of something that they're doing in school. So it is a very beneficial thing for everyone involved.
So can you describe a time when you successfully advocated for a child's needs, and what the key to getting the school leadership or parents on board?
I think the best way to advocate for a child's needs, again, is to show how beneficial that is for everyone. So I know that there are times where, there may be a challenging behavior in a child, And I think that teachers become concerned about if they are able to support the child in the way that they need to. I think making sure that as a staff feels supported. And so, whoever your administration is making sure that they are supporting, making sure that we're educating the teachers and the staff about what that child's needs are and how they can be supported. That would require, sometimes at our school, we have speech and language pathologists who come in, we have social workers who come in, psychologists, and it's a team approach. So I think when we're advocating, we're not just saying, okay, well, here's some students with high needs and now you've got them. We want to make sure we set up, everybody for success. So we are giving them sometimes a little additional support. We're calling in our experts to ask for how we can support the student the best, but it's a team effort. And I think that is the best way because it can be very daunting for anybody if they feel that they're not being supported. So I think the support is the key.
Okay, so with regards to teachers, what time of the day would you get or the time to be able to support them and advocate for these kids? Like, would you do it as a special training or what would you do?
Okay, so I think that there's two parts to that. I think first of all, you need to give them some support when there's no students around so that you can, the teacher feels comfortable sharing what their concerns are. And you may not always have the answers right then and there, but we're going to reach out to the right people to help us with the answers. And then I think it's important to have, our team go in and model as well. Sometimes we can give, verbal responses, but they need to see this is how you can work with the child, or this is how we can set up a system that works for the child. So I think they need a little bit of both. I think that they need, time outside of school, maybe before school, after school, during lunch, where they can sit down with you and talk about how do we start to implement strategies to make sure that the inclusion is successful. And then I think it's beneficial to bring in other people as well to help model that.
Okay, thank you for that. So last question is, we know that in Uganda, a lot of the schools segregate kids who have disabilities. It's either they have schools for the deaf and schools for the blind, and they, they have their place in education. But what is one policy or one change in a country that has a lot of that and where they don't have too many students in mainstream class because they don't have teachers who are trained, or they just think that maybe these kids all have this problem or this disability, so they should all be taught together and they shouldn't really be in mainstream. So what changes do you think a country like Uganda can make to move from exclusion or segregation of students towards true inclusion? And is it always possible to include everyone, or there are some circumstances where it's not that beneficial for the child to be included?
I think the first thing I would look at, is just financially, if you have schools that are perhaps for the deaf or schools for students who are blind, if you are able to include them and then you are bringing in those specialists into the school, they are often able to, set up systems in the school that support the child. And then often what happens is some of those systems or strategies are benefiting other students. So you're getting more out of the resources. You're getting more bang for your buck, so to say. And I think that helps everybody. So that's what we call like universal design for learning, where something that benefits one child may help many. It's similar to now we have buttons that we can push that opens doors for students with wheelchairs, But we also know that, if you're walking into the school and you're carrying lots of stuff, it helps us as well. We may not need it the same way, but it's still helpful. So when we are bringing all of those resources into the school, we are elevating, how we are teaching all students. So I think, when you're just looking at that, you can have that resource available all on its own for just the students with special needs, or you could bring them into the school and start to see how that helps everybody. As for, whether there are situations where, it is really difficult to include all students, I would say that there may be times where that is challenging, depending on the severity of the needs. If it is a student who is truly very medically fragile, you may have to be cautious about putting them in a mainstream class, because, we always want to ensure the safety of the student. Yes. So there are going to be times where it may not be prudent to do that, but in our schools we have found for the most part that it has been successful in many ways. Successful for the students with special needs, successful for staff, even when staff has been a little bit reluctant. By the end of the year they have gained a lot as a teacher. They have learned a lot, and they're then able to go on to the next set of students with more in their toolbox.
So if you have, say, there's a school in Uganda that wants to start out with including kids with different abilities in their school, they don't want to be overwhelmed, obviously, and open their gates right. when they don't have the resources. So what do you think a school could do just to take baby steps in preparation for children like that? How would they go about it? Because there are many schools that would love to have to support these kids, but they just don't have the resources or the training. Where can they begin?
I would begin with starting to meet with some of the specialists in the area that can support them. So whether it's calling in some speech and language pathologists to start to work with staff on how they can support students with needs in the speech and language area. Starting to call in some people who are specialists for students with autism to see how they can work with that. Then I would look at, bringing in a few students to start to see the difference. I think that you have to start, you don't want to just open your doors and not be prepared. So I think that would be one thing, maybe visiting other schools where there is more inclusivity for students with special needs to see how it's working there, and speaking with the staff to see what were some of the challenges and how are they finding things now. But I would definitely, I think it's good to tap into, people who have already done it, schools that have already done it successfully, and seeing how they are finding it's working.
Yeah, observation is always really good to have. And I know when someone talks about bringing in experts, a lot of people be ka-ching, ka-ching, money, money, money. We don't have the money, we can't do that. But that specialist doesn't have to be in every day. They can come in for an hour a week to work with a few students. So that's how you can cut down the cost of having them come in, and look at it as a benefit for the whole community. Don't just look at it as we're just going to be wasting money supporting one kid. In the end, if you have children who get somewhere, be it academically or socially, and are able to make their way through the school system and be able to get jobs, that will support whole communities. Because sometimes people look at disabled people and they think they're not capable. But just because my body is physically not capable doesn't mean that, mentally, intellectually, I'm not capable of achieving. Even if it's a disability that you can't see, right? There are many people, like I talked about in one of my podcasts, there's a guy called Stephen Hawkins who was, very disabled. He was in a wheelchair. He had to speak using a computer, but he was a great scientist. There's a doctor in Australia who is a lawyer and a pediatrician. He got into an accident when he was in medical school, and they're like, no, you can't continue medical school, you're in a wheelchair, one of your hands is paralyzed, there's no way you can be a pediatrician. But they are a few people who supported him. They put things in place in his medical school and in his workplace, and he's able to treat children and support children, even though he's in a wheelchair and one of his hands is paralyzed, he still does his job. So there's so much that we can gain from people with different abilities and improve our community, our economy, and things like that.
And I think if we believe in children, they start to believe in themselves. And the goal is always independence. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and those wonderful insights that you've shared with us.
Thank you.
And tune in next time. We'll have someone else that we're going to be interviewing. Look out for the trailers and continue to tune in so that you can learn more about inclusion. Inclusion is something that we're going to be focusing on with TFS, Teaching for Success, this year in 2020.